Crime Network. I'm Linda Kenny Bodden. As you know, we have been covering the trial of Iowa versus Cheyanne Harris for the death of her 4-month-old child, Sterling. Now, Sterling was found on August 30th, 2017, dead. He had been dehydrated. He had sepsis from E. coli bacteria. He had been in a chair for 9 to 14 days, no diapers, no nothing. We left you with Chief Deputy Reed Powell on the stand, who summed up by saying that basically he talked to the mother. The mother was upset. She didn't know when she last fed him, and the child had been born when she was with her mother. A wonderful report on this case, and we're going to go to it right now.
A young Iowa mother faces first-degree murder and child endangerment charges in connection with the death of her 4-month-old baby, Sterling Keene. Sterling was found dead and covered in maggots in his baby swing on August 30th, 2017. Authorities say the baby had not had a diaper change, bath, or been removed from the seat in over a week. The parents Zachary Keene and Cheyanne Harris are charged with baby Sterling's death. Authorities first responded to the home that morning after Keene called 911.
And she come in and woke me up and said it's gone. Okay. Cheyanne did it? Yeah. So I got on the phone and called you also that way. So I was a little disorientated and then woke up and told my son's dead.
He claimed the baby was fed at 9 a.m. that morning and was in good health. But when they checked on him just a few hours later, he had died. The medical examiner ultimately ruled the death as a homicide caused by failure to provide critical care, after an autopsy found maggots in various stages of development on the infant. The baby also had an extreme diaper rash and caused E. coli to enter into his bloodstream. Zachary Keene testified at his trial in November, which we showed here on the Law&Crime Network. He said that Harris was the primary caretaker of the child. Keene was ultimately found guilty after about an hour of jury deliberations and sentenced to life in prison. He is now seeking a new trial. If convicted, Harris also faces life in prison, the mandatory sentence for first-degree murder in Iowa. I'm Rachel Stockman for Law&Crime Network.
Wow. Thank you, Rachel Stockman, for that report and how we got here. And I'd like to introduce, to talk about what happened in the courtroom today, my guest, Francey Hakes. You know her well. Francey has great involvement with juvenile justice, protecting children. And this child, Francey, was not protected, was he?
No, Linda, this is just a horrific case, as horrific as any I've ever seen. It's neglect, but when you say neglect, it doesn't even really capture what happened to this child. To be ignored, to be denied food and sustenance, and of course, love and affection and just general basic care. And to have died the way he did is simply horrifying.
And Francey, what bothers me about this case is you have another toddler who seems to be perfectly well-fed, a dog who's well-fed. This child was released out of the hospital with meth in the umbilical cord. That should have raised some kind of red flag here. What happened?
I don't know, Linda. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's actually a crime. It is a crime to convey drugs to your child in whatever method that takes, even if that's in utero. So I do not understand why the child was released. I don't understand why there wasn't some kind of criminal investigation, much less one by social services. Just a real tragic lapse here.
Yeah. And one of the things is I'm not denying she could easily have postpartum depression. As we know, 15% of the women get that within either during pregnancy or within the first year after the child is born. She could have that. And that's what the defense is going to. But one of the things I don't understand, and maybe it makes sense that she had the baby when she was living with the mother, so there was a support system. But then where is everybody else? How do you remedy this in the future for this child to have maggots and sitting there in its diaper for 14 days, maybe, or 9 days? It doesn't really matter. It was 9 or 14. How do you remedy it, Francey?
I don't know. You know, you had two parents in the house. They had a new baby. Where were their relatives? Did no one ever come by to meet the new baby, to see the child, to visit it? Was there not an aunt or an uncle or even a neighbor? Did no one exist who could advocate for this child? It just seems like such a senseless, tragedy. I'm glad the husband was held accountable, or the father was held accountable, and I suspect the mother will be too. It's really going to be just a matter of what is the nature of that in this case.
Right. Well, let's see what the prosecution intends to prove, because they're going after a murder charge. The defense obviously wants a diminished capacity to get a lesser included charge. Let's see what the prosecution told the jury this morning and how they're going to prove murder.
Malnutrition, dehydration, infection caused by E. coli bacteria. That's what caused Sterling's death. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case will show that the defendant, Cheyanne Harris, was a stay-at-home mom, that she was in that apartment. Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, the evidence in this case will show that Sterling suffered in the last hours and days before his death. His body racked by fever from infection, with maggots feeding on his body's fluids, on the contents of his diaper, laying in urine and feces, soaked clothing. And at that time, his mother wasn't out of state. She wasn't across town. She was in the next room in that little apartment, ignoring his cries, ignoring his basic needs, ignoring her child, who lay in the swing, unloved.
Well, that's a pretty effective opening, because you're talking about how terrible the death was. Not that all deaths aren't terrible. Every death is terrible. But this is such a baby who needs an advocate, who had a mother and a father. And to die like this with the sepsis and the dehydration and the maggots eating, the feces and whatever dead tissue there was. Francey Hakes, if I were defending this case, if you were defending this case, now, I would actually adopt that. I would say it's so bad, and you have these other kids and the dog, that something went wrong here between her brain and that child. What do you say about that? Do you think that would be a good strategy or no?
I think you're right, Linda. There's really nothing else to do. One of the things that the prosecutor said that really struck me, though, is almost, and it's opening statement, so he has to be a little more clinical, but talking about malnutrition and dehydration, that is starving a child to death. And the child died of thirst. I mean, no one was feeding or giving this child any kind of sustenance. I think malnutrition is just such a clinical term, but you're right. There's only one way to go here, and that is it's so bad that it suggests some mental disease or defect prevented the mother from caring for the child.
Yeah, and then when you watch her in court, the jury is going to be watching her in court, but we don't know whether she has been medicated since, and that may have to come out. Now, when you have the father who was in the room, do you then place the blame and say, look, she was so out of it? Do you also add to him, because we know he's been convicted, do you dump it all on him too if you're the defense attorneys?
Well, of course. I mean, you have to point the finger, and I think they're going to play and I hate to say this because, of course, new mothers do experience postpartum depression, and being a mom.
And it's a serious, we don't want to make light of it because it's a serious issue. Right.
It absolutely is. But I think what the defense team has to do is blame the father. They have to say she needed help. She needed assistance. She couldn't do it because of the condition that she was in. And so he's really the one who was ultimately responsible for the child's death.
Do you think that the prosecution made a mistake not getting, there was testimony that somebody bought child supplies at the Hy-Vee, which is a supermarket drugstore combination in Iowa, which, by the way, I checked the temperature. It's not -0. It is 19 or 17 degrees right now. But somebody bought that, and the prosecution did not get the tape of who bought the supplies a couple of weeks earlier, a couple of months. It doesn't almost matter. Do you think that hurts the prosecution or helps the prosecution?
Well, I think it helps the defense. It at least suggests that someone did care for the child. And so who was that? If I'm the defense team and there's no evidence, I'm claiming it's my defendant. I'm claiming it's my client who actually did it and did try her best to care for the child. That's certainly the claim I would make.
Well, let's see. The defense did give an opening in this case, which they don't have to do. It's short and to the point, but let's listen.
There's no doubt that this case is a terrible case. It's a tragedy. you're going to wonder what kind of monster could do something like this. The monster in this case is mental health. The monster in this case is depression, postpartum, substance abuse. You're going to hear evidence in this case about Ms. Harris, what she was going through, how she suffered from depression, how she suffered from postpartum, and how she self-medicated. You're not going to hear in this case about the typical type of actions you might hear when you hear about child abuse. You're not going to hear about injuries. You're not going to hear about broken bones. You're not going to hear about bruises. You're not going to hear about any purpose on Ms. Harris's part to harm Sterling. You're not going to hear about any evil design or any plan or any ill will towards Sterling. You're not going to hear any evidence that she's evil. That's because she's not evil, and this case is not murder.
Francey Hakes, that was the defense opening. I actually thought it was pretty good. She was very clear that what you're not going to hear and what you are going to hear is postpartum depression. What did you think?
Well, it wasn't bad, but my argument, of course, when she talks about there was nothing purposeful, I think, in fact, the opposite applies here. Every time the child cries, every time she passed the child, she is purposefully ignoring the child's needs. Every hour that passes where she doesn't give the child food, doesn't give the child milk, doesn't bathe or change the child is a purposeful decision. At least that's how I'd argue the case.
One of the things interesting is that this child gets that dehydration and malnutrition and is 7 pounds after 4 months. The child may not even have been able to cry at that point. I assume that, and I don't know if there could be medical testimony, but obviously the child wouldn't have been right. I mean, it's just terrible.
It's a horrible case, Linda. There's just really no good explanation. I don't envy the defense team this one. This is as bad as it gets when it comes to child abuse. When you're talking about a 4-month-old having died in this condition, the jury is going to be looking to hold someone accountable, and mom is, suspect number one.
Moms generally do get held accountable and they get the blame. But you know what? We can talk about this all day. The defense hasn't presented this case, but how did it start? How did the police know that little Sterling had died? There was a 911 call. Let's listen to it because it was made by Dad Zachary Cohen, who's been convicted of murder.
County 911.
This is Zach Cohen. I need an ambulance sent out here to my apartment.
Okay, what's your address, Zach?
107 South Hilltop Avenue in Alta Vista.
Okay, what's going on?
Around 9, my girlfriend went to feed our son, and then about 11 or 11:30, she went to check on him, and he was gone.
Gone meaning?
He died.
Okay.
He's like probably 4 months. I don't know if it's sudden death syndrome or what.
Okay. So you live at 107 South Hilltop in Alta Vista? What?
Apartment 7.
Apartment 7? Okay. And your son is 4 months old, and the last time that you was checked on was 9?
No, it was she was fed him at 9.
Okay.
And she hadn't heard him. She went to check on him, hadn't heard him cry or whatever, and so probably about 11:30, 11:40, she went to check on him. He passed away.
Well, that was Dad reporting that his son was, quote, gone, which means he had died, and the last time somebody had checked on him was 9, but then when the mother went in there to feed him, he says at 11:40 or so, they found that Sterling had died. Now, Francey Hakes, what we've learned is that that's an impossibility, that when the paramedics got there, the child had rigor mortis, which starts, by the way, because I did ask my husband, when does rigor mortis start? In the jaw about 2 hours after you die, okay? And so according to this paramedic, the child was really stiff and cold, completely cold. So does this hold water, in the words of a famous movie, that they checked on him and they were about to feed him?
No, I mean, that's an obvious lie that was disproved by forensics and other testimony in the previous trial. I'm sure it'll be disproved again in this trial. What's most striking about that I think will strike the jurors, Linda, is the tone of the father of the baby. He could not care less.
Yeah. Well, Francey, we're monitoring the courtroom. We have to do to pay the bills. We have to take a little break, but stay with us here at Law and Crime Network, because we're going to follow and give you more testimony if they're not back from the break, but when we get back, and we'll listen to the first responders and what they saw. It was terrible, terrible. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Linda Kenny Bodden. We are following the case of Cheyanne Harris. 4 months before her little child Sterling was found dead, she gave birth to him. When she gave birth to him, there was meth in the umbilical cord, and yet the baby went home with her and Dad Zachary Cohen and then was dead in a terrible way. I'm going to let you listen to now, and I'll tell you right now, be prepared, get your tissues to cry, because it's awful, what the first responders saw. This is Toni Friedrich. She is a nurse on the scene on August 30th, 2017, to see this.
Apartment?
Yes.
What did you do?
So I pulled up, and I pulled right up, and I saw a man, a woman, and a little girl, and I got out of my car and I went running up to them and said, "Where's the baby?" Nobody was showing any emotion, and the man goes inside, and I said, "Show me." And so he took me inside. We walked in, and we went to the back bedroom. He took me to the back bedroom, and it was dark, and it was stuffy, and there was a stench of urine there. I went to check a brachial pulse on him, and his arm was stiff and rigid and cold. All of his extremities were cold. His little feet were cold. His hands were clenched in a fist, and he wasn't breathing, and his clothes were like crusty. Yeah.
Did the room have windows in it?
There was blankets over the one window that was in there, so that it didn't show any light.
What did the room feel like?
It was hot. It was stuffy. There was the stench of urine.
What did you do?
Well, after I did my assessment and realized that I couldn't do anything, I called back into the Sheriff's Department and asked for the sheriff to come and another medical examiner.
Why did you call the Sheriff's Department?
Because this was not right. Something was not right here.
Well, that's Toni Friedrich. She is one of the first responders. She's a nurse on the scene, and what she saw is a baby. She couldn't find a crib. A baby in a swing who was cold. The extremities were cold. The hands were clenched in the fist, and obviously she recognized not only there was a baby dead, but something was not right. Now, Francey Hakes. This something is not right can either be murder, like the dad, because there was nothing wrong with the dad except that he didn't like to clean poop, apparently, from people, and his son was a person that he didn't want to take care of. But the mother, the question is it intentional, or did she not take care of the baby for at least 2 weeks, or maybe more? Maybe more, we don't know, but the last diaper change was about 2 weeks ago, because she had postpartum depression and/or a mix of intoxication to reduce her mental state from a murder to like a manslaughter. What say you?
Well, you know, Linda, I heard something very significant there to me when it comes to intent, and that is that the baby's swing was facing a wall. Somebody purposefully turned that child so that all it had to look at in its life for those last weeks or maybe days was a blank wall. That sounds like someone who says in their own mind, I'm ignoring this. This is not a person. This is not something I'm going to deal with. he can face a wall, and then when I walk by that room, I don't have to look at his little face begging me for help, for food, for milk, for something. That seems intentional.
Wow. Thank you, Francey. We're going to go back to court now. The Chief Deputy Reed Powell appears to we just got back on the stand. Let's hear what he's talking about now. While Detective Reed Powell is continuing on about the search warrants, I'd like to bring my guest Francey Hakes in for a couple of questions. Francey, something that impressed me here that I would pick on the defense, when he talked to Jennifer next door, the babysitter, who had sat for Sterling. I'd obviously want to know when that was. And Zach, previously, according to that answer, she didn't sit for the mother. Right? I mean, Zach seemed to be the dad. And we did also learn that she was diagnosed with the birth of Nala with the postpartum depression, but never took the medicine for it because it made her sick. What do you make of that for the prosecution and for the defense?
Well, Linda, it's really interesting because what it shows me, the existence of this other child, Nala, who, according to what this witness is testifying to, the parents were concerned about leaving her with a neighbor when they went down to the police station. She needed diapers, is that they've made a choice. They've taken care of one child. I think that completely blows out of the water the idea of any kind of mental defense here. If she's caring for one child, how could she not also care for two? It doesn't make any sense at all.
And one of the other things that I noticed while listening to it, and you see there's the dad, there's Zachary with Nala, and she looks fabulous. They look like they have a fabulous relationship, that there was some disconnect going on about this child. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why.
Well, you know, it's often the case in cases of child abuse. We see families that have multiple children and one child is singled out for neglect or abuse over and above or instead of any of the other children. I think the other significant thing that came out of this witness was that he was talking about the mother having sought treatment for postpartum, right, having been given a prescription. She obviously took it at some point, discovered it made her sick and stopped taking it, but she understood about needing medical treatment and yet didn't take Sterling to a single baby visit.
And the dad did too. We have to go to break. When we come back, we hope that we'll see some cross-examination of this witness on the stand. This is a horrible case. Stay tuned. This is Detective Reed Powell testifying about taking little Sterling, a 4-month-old baby, to the medical examiner's office and undressing him layer by layer and putting him in the swings so the medical examiner could see how he died. Sterling, 4 months old, Sterling Cohen, the father, Zachary's already been convicted. Mother, Cheyanne Harris, is on trial. Now, Francey Hakes, what are your thoughts about this deputy's testimony today? Because I thought that he was terrific. I thought that every investigator should take a lesson from him, how you investigate a case and how you testify.
Yeah, he's very effective as a witness, Linda. I think part of it is because he's telling a good story. He's going in chronological order. He's well-spoken. But I think part of it is because he's soft-spoken. He's not emotional, but he's also not robotic. And so I think he's incredibly likable, very credible, and the jury will take every single thing he says and believe him. I don't think the defense is going to get very far if they try any cross-examination.
Yeah, and this is a serious case because, as we know, it does involve a defense of intoxication and postpartum depression combined. And that this woman was diagnosed in the past with postpartum depression, and she clearly had drug addiction. So we do want to shine a light on parenting when you have these issues. Do you have any thoughts about how this could have been prevented?
Oh, gosh, Linda, you know, that's a great question. I mean, I think that when there was evidence found that there was methamphetamine in the umbilical cord, I think that should have alerted authorities. There should have been a criminal investigation, or at minimum, a child services investigation into the care of the child. When he missed his well baby visits, someone should have been asking questions. I don't really understand how this happened. It really is hard to explain.
Yeah, it really is hard to explain how this child died. Maggots, diapers not changed for 14 days. is in a swing, just doing nothing but sleeping on a swing. It is such a brutal case, and it's such a brutal case that maybe we need that brutal case so that we look into postpartum depression and intoxication. Whether or not this woman is guilty or not guilty, that really is another issue for the trial. But we also want to discuss these very important social issues, and we're going to continue that discussion. Aaron Keller is going to be next at 5 o'clock, as you know, on the Daily Debrief. I'm going to be his guest. I listen to Aaron when I'm not there, so I'm so happy to be with him. Tomorrow we'll be back discussing this case. I assume that Mr. Powell, Detective Powell, Chief Detective Powell, will be on the cross-examination. We also have the McStay case, who was on a site visit today. A site visit without us. Can you imagine that? But anyhow, we should probably hear about it. So there's so much happening in the legal world, so important to our society. I'm Linda Kenny Bodden. I'm here today, your host for Law&Crime Network. I'm going to see you next week. Thank you. Stay tuned. Bye.